Hi, this is just a quick little video to show how I demonstrate to get a successful bridle joint cut, and this actually applies to the lap joints as well, of course, but the question was specifically about the bridle joints. And as you can see, I do have this marked up already on both sides. So what I do is I get this pretty aggressively raked towards me within the vise, and I talk about making sure that you give yourself plenty of room when you're making this cut, because I can see what happens as I lean in, it's going to start bending the blade or leaning the blade that way, and you're going to start getting the slices this way, and that seems to be very common with a lot of students. So I always tell them to kind of take a half step back, give yourself a little bit of space, and then you'll make sure that you're just pivoting straight from this should all be straight from your tip of the saw blade wrist all the way through the elbow. I tend to grip the blade almost like a chef's knife, so I have it nice and stable and firm control. The only thing that should be pivoting is my shoulder and my elbow, which should be right directly above the joint, so I'm just kind of pivoting back and forth. So the next thing I want to do is I'd like to get just a little, establish a kerf line going straight down here, and that will actually act as a jig for when I start cutting down into the wood itself. So I talk about the kerf of the blade, and so every blade has a thickness that's going to be removing material. I make the analogy with a table saw blade, which is usually 1/8 of an inch wide, and all of a sudden that's like real material. But it even applies to like even thin blades like this, where you want to put it right on a pencil line. I tell them to take the pencil line off, but the blade should be on the waist side of the joint. And of course, I would have them mark this up as waist so they don't get confused. And I will use the crosscut side to make just a little bit of a nick here, just to kind of get started with the blade, and just like so. Not much, just something to drop the saw blade into. I'll flip it over, and I'm going to race down using my thumb to kind of stabilize that joint or that saw blade. And you can see that's all I'm doing, and you can see exactly how shallow that is exactly. I'm hardly taking any cut out of that at all. But as I start to cut it down, pivot down, then I will be able to make that slice. Or this will help stabilize the blade. So now I just have to focus on keeping it straight going down this way. Tighten up. So now I could just focus my attention on this line back here that is clearly on camera. And this will become nice and straight. Until I come out the other side. And just to see, you can see how I'm just starting to come out to the other side. So I will now flip it over. You always want to flip it over. You don't want to try to do the whole cut at once, because you'll have an opportunity to kind of reset again here if you do start to go offline a little bit. Now, another thing that a lot of students do is they continue to use like the cross-cut side all the way down. This is not good for doing rip cuts. The teeth are kind of splayed apart, as we know. And what that does is allows the saw blade to kind of wander a little bit within the cut itself and get kind of like those, rounded out cuts and things like that. So I want to get that just down to there where I could drop the saw blade right back in that kerf line. And I'm going to do the same thing here. I'm going to just race down to that finish or reveal line, whatever you want to call it, right down to there. Very shallow cut again, as you can see. Very shallow cut. Now I have all of this removed here, and I'm going to start tackling it from this side. It's also very important to have this. When I was talking about the splayed apart teeth here, you'll notice that there's no offset on these teeth whatsoever, so it does make for a nice clean cut. I also talk about making sure that you use the entire length of the blade. If you're coming in here and doing like these little saw marks things that I see a lot of students doing, that also allows the cut to actually start to wander a little bit too. So make sure you take full advantage of that blade. And now I have all of it taken out except for just the middle part, and this is real easy now. We're just going to take that last little bit out, and then we will do a complete rinse and repeat on this side as well. Just take a little bit of a slice there just to get my saw blade started. I use the knuckle of my thumb just to help stabilize that blade, because this is kind of very important here to get that nice and cut. There we go. Pretty happy with that. So now I can start dropping the saw blade. Cutting at a 45-degree angle until I'm coming out to the side. I'll flip it over. And see, I am starting to deviate off that line. Hopefully that shows up on camera, because we're not all perfect, but now you will have a chance to reset that cut, and it won't make a difference at the end of the day, because I've taken that opportunity to do it again. So now I could just take out that waste right there, and now I could finish that cut as well. And you can see that is a very, let's see if I'm on the camera, that's a very straight, clean cut. Now as far as hogging that out, I'll do that real quick. I'm gonna pause just to get a little bit of a reset. Okay, so as far as hogging out this middle part, real simple. I always talk about in class how typically we're sneaking up to the cut because you could always take off more material, but you can't put it back. We've all heard that expression. That is especially true in power tools, table saws, and all that other stuff. In hand tools, I tend to kind of reverse that psychology a little bit. I like to actually get my cut lines done first, because we've all experienced where if you're hogging out a bunch of material, then what's happening is you get up to this line and the line gets lost, it gets chewed up. So I actually do that first. I want to get my cut lines nice and clean and straight. Just a little tap, and I'll come back, do a little chip out. That helps prevent any sort of, when I start banging on this thing, it's gonna, as these wood fibers compress, they're not gonna damage the shoulder at all. And I'll usually use a pencil, even in class, to just kind of illustrate that little bevel, just to demonstrate to the students where I actually start my chisel mark. I usually start right at the top of that little chip out that I've made, and I'm gonna hold that nice and steady, but I always talk about how this is your chance to get a little aggressive. Let me maybe widen this out a little bit. There we go. And now we get to go to town. I always talk about, you have, picture your boss's face on this chisel, and you're getting a chance to take out a little bit of frustration with your boss from the day. That doesn't apply to you, Sean, of course, but you get to take out, really get aggressive in there. I do teach the method of hogging out the material this way, because we all know we could come in this way and chip out, but this actually gives very good practice, and I actually illustrate this in class, that this will pay for itself when we're doing the mortise and tenon, and even the dovetails when we're kind of hogging out material. It just is really helpful. So I usually will take 2 or 3 passes down. Now you notice I'm kind of holding this at an angle. I actually point out to the students that I'm actually starting to tack towards the middle here. That's because in the olden days, they didn't want to futz around with trying to make that a perfect 90 degrees. They just kind of hogged out the middle, the part that was never going to be revealed again once it was all kind of glued up or tacked up or whatever. And then slide down that bevel. usually it takes just a little bit of effort. I'm about halfway down, so I could use my chisel just as a gauge that way. And that looks about right, so I'll flip that over. Repeat the process, doing a nice little, let's get that lined up. That's where that's where all the money is right there, all those little details. So you just you want to take time to get those nice and square, if you can. I'll color that in for the student's sake, but also for the camera. And then I will continue banging it. You can see how that drives up fibers, but it's not going to damage that shoulder there because of that little chip out. Come back out here. I could do a nice little chip out there. I also tell students, make sure you put some weight behind this. Oh, see, it's already cracked open. So now that I have that all, and this is a nice tight fit, now that I have that hogged out, that whole chip out, now I could kind of come back and I could just kind of do a nice, gentle clean out. Pop that out. Do the same thing for this side. And naturally, if you've done it properly, then this should be nice and flat. It should not rock back and forth. You should have a nice, tight joint there. You can see where I did a little bit of over, but that's okay. And then that's it. You can see is a nice bridle joint that would be pretty effective. So let me know if you have any questions. Talk to you guys soon.